So for some introductions, I am Dr. Hernandez, and I am the Executive Director of Diversity, Equity. Pronouns are she, her. And I'm thrilled to be joining you all here today with some of my esteemed colleagues. And in a minute, I'll have them introduce themselves as well. But I'd like to start with just a kind of quick introduction of the topic that we're going to be discussing here today. So you may have seen the title, Empowering Women Through Intersectionality. So what do we mean by that? So there are a lot of different definitions out there around intersectionality, as it calls attention to the fact that we all have different and distinct identities. And these identities are oftentimes based on various social categories, such as race and ethnicity, gender identity, sexual orientation, age, socioeconomic status, and others. And since we are all diverse and have these different identities, they can lead to unique experiences both in the workplace as well as in our personal lives. And it's at the intersect of these identities which can result in what we call a multiplier effect, whereby the individual who has these different identities can either experience all of those positive things around the social identities as well as the negative association and perhaps discrimination as it relates to those social identities. And when we see an intersect happen between identities of various underserved or historically marginalized communities, those identities can have a compounding effect on the personal experiences of that individual. So let me give you an example. We know that in the workplace, women face certain challenges. We also know that people of color in the workplace face certain challenges. So women of color, women who identify with the LGBTQ plus community, women with disabilities, we may experience a combination as well as new challenges that are unique to that group. So that's what we're here to discuss today. We want to empower one another to really embrace our authentic identity and leverage them as a superpower in the workplace. So with that, I love for, yes, show our muscles off. With that, I love to have my panel introduce themselves. Lawanda, why don't we start with you? Please share your name, your title, and what does intersectionality mean to you? Oh, but I think you're still on mute.
Okay, let's start this over. Okay, thank you. I'm so excited to be here. Hi, everyone. My name is LaWanda Scott, and I currently work for Pratt & Whitney as the Operations Strategy and Customer Service Manager for Aftermarket Operations. I am also the chair of the Black Excellence Network. And so I love this topic, and I'm very excited to talk about it. For me, intersectionality means recognizing that my experiences and perspective are shaped by my identities, right? My identity as a woman and my identity as a person of color. So it means that understanding that these identities are not separate and distinct, but they're together, they're interwoven and interdependent. And that creates a complex tapestry that shapes who I am now and who I am going forward. So that's what intersectionality means for me.
Great. Description. Next, Sarah, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself? And same question.
Thanks, Lexi. Hi, everyone. Sarah Lincoln. I am a human resources talent management professional, and I'm also the global chair for our Indigenous ERG, which is RTX Alliance of Indigenous Nations. I identify as an Indigenous woman. I'm currently based in Tucson, Arizona. And what intersectionality means to me is really celebrating the strength that we bring. I just introduced myself as an Indigenous woman, and I've got a lot of other facets in addition to that, but really finding strength in those intersections within myself and within those intersections with others, and really using those, I think, unique traits to your advantage in the workplace professionally, and also in our everyday lives to connect with each other and to help raise each other up.
Great. Thank you so much, Sarah. SJ, over to you. And same question as well. What does intersectionality mean to you?
Okay. Hey, everybody. I'm Sarah Jessica, or SJ Curry. I'm a senior analyst for the digital quality and mission assurance team. And intersectionality to me, it means knowing your whole self, learning who you are, and realizing all the crossroads that make up you. And so that could be neurodiversity or anything that's visual. Some things are not visual, and we have to be aware of ourselves. And the more aware of ourselves that we are, the more aware we can be of others.
That's great. Thank you so much. And Yolanda, round us out.
Great. My name is Yolanda Turner-Smith, and I work for Collins Aerospace. I am the platform chief engineer for the Foreign Military and Lockheed Martin and Northrop Grumman programs. And I'm also a part of the ERG, just as Lawanda. I am the Global Communications Chair for the Black Excellence Network. We affectionately call it BXN for short. And so when I look at intersectionality, I think all the ladies have said it nicely. It is all the stuff that makes us up. It is those things that are immutable, like our race, our height, things like that. And it's also those things that may change with time, like our political views, the things that we like to do. And so I think those are the things that make us unique and provides us with different perspectives that come, so that when we're coming to the table, we have diverse ideas. I don't think people realize how diverse they really are.
Yeah, thank you. And couldn't agree more. You know, we are various identities, as we'll be talking about here today. And I think when we are able to really harness that diversity through inclusion, that's when we achieve that a significant business case that we're always talking about with diversity in terms of innovation and knowledge transfer and profit for organizations, but also for ourselves and our own sense of belonging and connectiveness in the organization. So really looking forward to our conversation here today. And for those of us who are just joining us, just a reminder that you can enter in some questions that you have for our panelists into the chat. We will be keeping an eye on that and elevating some of those questions live. And so I'm going to go ahead and dive into some specific questions. SJ, I'd like to start with you. You know, as I talked about in the definition of intersectionality, we find that women often face unique challenges in the workplace, many of which we're really trying to overcome as an organization, as RTX. So for women who also identify with another historically marginalized or underrepresented group, they also face additional challenges. Would you mind sharing with us if any of those challenges that you've faced and how you've overcome them and how you've dealt with challenges in the workplace?
Certainly. So I failed to mention that I'm also the communications chair for the RTX Pride Pratt & Whitney board. And so that is something that's close to my heart. I came out to myself as a lesbian when I was 22. Up to that point, I was clueless, and I realized it, and it was one of those things that really altered the course of my life, from the mindset that I grew up in, and it opened my life, and that was really my first big step in self-awareness as an adult. Was, you know, I'm a woman coming into the workplace, and I'm also, you know, gonna have to be aware of how I have the conversations when everybody's talking about their family over the weekend. You know, how do I join that conversation? I was a teacher for 4 years, and so I'm in the very center of Mississippi, and it's definitely been challenging, you know, to approach things the right way, you know, as a teacher, especially, you know, what was funny is that during my interview with the principal of my first school, I said, I just want you to know that I am married to a woman. And he was like, oh, okay, just don't tell the kids. I was like, okay, I'm not going to tell the kids. But it was just I realized even in that very first interview, I had several people tell me, do not come out to anybody at work. Do not talk to them about this. You could lose your job. You could, you know, all these things. And it was like, but that's who I am. And for me, living authentically means truth, and it means being myself, because I'm not very good at making up stories about, you know, to kind of buffer my heart or self-preserve. I'm just kind of an open book, and I have to embrace that about me. And so what I love about Raytheon, and I say Raytheon as a whole because I started off with Raytheon in the middle of Mississippi, and my first supervisor, as a woman coming into a workplace that is male dominated, for me to have an idea, I expected to bring up the idea and then be, you know, kind of buffered, like, okay, well, that's cool that you think you could do that, but let's talk about our options. I told him I had an idea for improving something at work, and he said, make it happen. And for me, that was life changing, because that was a man in a position where he could definitely have told me, tone it down, let's see how it's always been done first. But he said, make it happen. And he gave me that power. And, you know, I just cherish, if you're a supervisor of any sort, you're a leader, or even just somebody who is an individual contributor, but can talk to the neighbor who sits beside you or is on Zoom with you, encourage those people, you know, let each other know that ideas are good, and, you know, work as a team, and encourage, especially your employees, if they have an idea, let them bring it to the table. Try to recognize your subconscious bias, because we all have them, and try to recognize if that's something that would stop you from allowing, even though he was not in that mindset. So very cool.
Thank you for that. And thank you for sharing in such an authentic and transparent way. And a couple of the key takeaways that I have from what you just spoke about is just the first and foremost, the power of being able to bring our authentic selves into the workplace, and how that contributes not only to our performance and engagement on a day-to-day basis, but also our own mental health. And I also heard about the power of allyship and that connection with leaders, and how critical that can be as well in enabling others to show up in that authentic way. Sarah, I'd love to hear from you as well. Anything you would like to add to the conversation around any challenges you've dealt with in the workplace and how you've overcome them?
Certainly. Thanks, Lexi. As part of my intro, I explained to identify as an Indigenous woman. And I would say, as a community, Indigenous people are not always the best at self-promoting, which is something that is valued in the corporate workplace. And so even I would say growing up, you know, Indigenous people are taught humility and also respect, which can come across, you know, differently in the workplace, and not really support that idea of self-promotion. And so that's something that as I've gone through my career, I've really had to remind myself how to advocate and highlight work that I'm doing, and how to do that with within leadership. And I would say also within our ERG community that I mentioned. I serve on the global board for our Indigenous ERG RAIN. And that's something that we've recognized is an area where we can help support our Indigenous employees. And so we actually, as an ERG, have invested in some development around personal branding and helping our employees focus in that area that may not come naturally as a strength to them culturally, and help them with tools and resources in how to self-advocate, how to brand themselves internally to the company and also externally. One of the really cool things that this course has provided to our members is how to brand yourself externally on social media, which has been really cool and really a fun area for us to explore. I'd also touch on something that SJ mentioned in allyship and advocacy. I think it's really important, and I've done this for myself and encourage others, of course, as a talent management professional, to find those mentors and those advocates within the organization that you can have, these ongoing career discussions with, and really be able to highlight, the work that you're doing, and be able to make those connections to provide greater visibility to folks that may not know you, or to something like I mentioned that may not come naturally culturally in regards to self-promotion. So those are a couple of tips that I've used and that our ERG has provided to our broader membership to help them in that area.
Thanks, Sarah. Appreciate that. And I love the connection between some of those cultural nuances are in terms of how our Indigenous population is able to navigate the organization and their career experiences, and how you're connecting that into your ERG strategy. Fantastic. I want to move on to another question. So we talked a little bit about challenges. Now let's talk about superpowers. So as we talked about, our intersectional identities are also a superpower. So Luanda, I would love to hear from you first. How have you recognize and harness your superpower?
I actually love this question, and I was going to answer it one way, but I'm choosing to be a little bit more authentic with it. First and foremost, I have come to recognize recognize and harness actually my superpower by always having the ability to reflect on my own experiences and how those experiences, and I might add challenges, right, have shaped my world, and how I am able to take those challenges that I've experienced and those experiences and bring them into the workplace. But when I dig deeper and I think about what is my true superpower, the thing that I hear the most in the back of my head, I have a lot of sayings that my grandmother, at some point in my life, I lived with my grandmother, and she always used to drop little nuggets of wisdom on me. And one thing she always said is, you got to make $1 out of 15 cents. Right? Now, some who identify with me and in my world, like Yolanda's shaking her head, she knows exactly what I'm talking about. In my world, there was a lot of struggle. I was the first person to go to college. I had a young daughter. I had my daughter when I was a very, very young age. And these are all things that at some point in my life, I used to be so embarrassed about it. And I used to be afraid of telling the story about how I had my daughter when I was 19 years old. And I couldn't tell that story without crying and breaking down. And one day I said, Luanda, you got to get yourself together, right? Like, why are you crying and being so emotional about this part of your life? And what I came to understand is that I was telling that story out of shame instead of resilience. of how I made it through, right? I was looking at my life experience in a way that I felt ashamed because the people I worked around, the people I interacted with, it seemed like they had a perfect life. But because I had to go through the challenges, and because I always had that in the back of my mind, make $1 out of 15 cents. So what does that mean? Well, when my grandmother would say that, she would say, you may only have a little that was given to you, but you stretch what was given to you and you make it work for you. So when I come into the workplace, sometimes we don't have the resources. Sometimes we don't have the tools, but I make $1 out of 15 cents. So that is my superpower.
I love, and I'll be fully transparent. I got goosebumps. I love that. And again, thank you for sharing in such an authentic and transparent way. And that's the real, again, power in being able to have some of these conversations amongst one another. SJ, I'd love for you to contribute as well. What's your superpower, and how have you managed that in the workplace?
So my superpower is my what I called my neurodiversity. I have a attention deficit issue, but no, I say ADHD is my superpower because I like the way my brain works. Other people don't always like the way it works. They can't always keep up, but and sometimes I can't keep up with it either. But it really draws out my authenticity because I can't lie, because I tell on myself too easily because it's just impulsive. It just comes out. But that's good for me. And that's something that's really helped me to be a writer. I published a book a few years ago, and that's something that really brought my whole experience of life together in one place for me. And it was something I was able to share with the world and say, this is who I am. This is how I feel humans are connected. And I was telling a friend of mine last week, I'm going through a breakup right now, and it's been a really rough few weeks. And so one thing that I told a friend of mine last week, I said, I tell people my story because I'm a human who likes to make other humans feel, she said, human? It's like, yes. Yes. Like, I want other people to know that they're not alone. And one of the images that I actually kind of wrote about was, I feel like we all have the opportunity to stand in light, in openness, in truth, in hope, just in a good place. But sometimes when the world kind of gets in our head, and when we kind of get in our own head about things and negative thoughts come, we kind of lean toward getting behind something. And if the light is shining towards you and you get behind something, suddenly you're in the dark, you're in the shadow. And in the shadow is where you start feeling that fear and, things like that. And to me, fear does not have power. Fear is a shadow. It's only there because we're hiding behind something that the light is behind. And so, what we have to do when we get to that place, if you're in a place where you're hiding in a shadow for whatever reason, be it fear of retaliation in the workplace, be it fear of losing your job for who you are, be it fear of whatever. If you're hiding in that place, then you're going to feel alone. But it's that person who chooses to step out of the shadow into the light that still thinks they might be alone. But when they step out, everybody else that's around them that's still hiding in those shadows can see them and realize, I haven't been alone this whole time. I have not been alone. But you don't know it until you step out, until you tell your story, until you're real with people. You don't have to tell everybody your whole life story, but recognize in other humans what they need. What we know each other. We can recognize what each other needs in I want to say spiritual way, not necessarily religious, but just we feel each other. And if you know that story that you're holding could really help somebody not feel alone, then just take the time to consider if that's something that you need to do.
I think that's such a powerful message. And if it's okay, I'd like to borrow your quote. I like the way my brain works. I think that is also a really powerful note. Sarah, Yolanda, anything you'd like to add in terms of your superpowers?
Yeah, so just building off of what Lawanda and SJ said, I sent them a note saying, what they said was encouraging. And when I look at my superpower, I think I have a level of resiliency from growing up in what they call the rough parts of the South Side of Chicago, right? And then building on top of that, I am also dyslexic, but I'm also an engineer. Most people do not know. I have learned that resiliency, and I have learned how to take a step back, because if I don't, things become jumbled, right? Because of that pressure. And so I think those are the things that makes me good and position me for the jobs that I'm in now. And so I think looking at those things that we've always assumed was a negative, and finding out how we have managed not only to cope with them, but to succeed despite, because it's not our limitation, it becomes our base. And so your base is something, I think it was said to me by a professor when he discovered I was dyslexic. He said, your base is your springboard. So where you are now and the things that you have, all your intersectionality becomes your base to do so much more. So don't use that as a limit.
So, yes, Sarah, such a great message, Yolanda, such a please.
Lexi, if I could add, my superpower is, I would say, my home or my personal life and my family. And I say that because, the majority of the workday I spend with my colleagues, and they don't always get to see, that side of me when, we leave the office or we step away from our computer. And I think it's so important to prioritize the people in our lives that are most important, our biggest, fans, so to speak. And I think that's something that I try to prioritize in my having that work-life balance, and really focusing on those people and those moments that matter in my life. And for me, I love some of the stories that my colleagues have shared. Lawanda, I really resonated with the story about your mother, and Yolanda, the theme of resilience here, I really love it. What's really important to me is culture, and having that cultural connection with my family, and prioritizing time for that outside of the workplace. The matriarch of our family is my mother, and so really prioritizing time with her and my two daughters to pass along experiences, and I would say cultural things that we find important in that downtime that we can share with each other. And I would also encourage folks to, for those, that we spend most of our days with that don't get to see that part of us, being able to bring part of that self to work and to share those experiences with others. So I try to post a lot of my experiences that I have outside of the workplace on social media, organizations that I'm involved with, things that I do with my family on the weekend, from a cultural perspective, because I want to talk about it. I want to share it with people. I want people to ask me about that. And so I think it's really important for me. That's my superpower, is that connection to family and culture, to prioritize that in my life, but to also bring my whole self to work, and share with others about how those experiences shape me as a person. And really, that's my superpower.
Thank you all for sharing it, and knowing each and every one of you, I can share that what our panel is sharing here today is the truth, is their authentic self. So really appreciate that, and thought I would round us out a little bit by sharing my superpowers. So I come from a bi-ethnic background. So my father is Hispanic and my mother is white. And growing up, I never really felt like I belong in either space or with either group. I wasn't white enough. I wasn't Hispanic enough. You know, we didn't grow up speaking Spanish in my household. And so I had a hard time, you know, really kind of finding my place and my footing in terms of those relationships with individuals of similar ethnic and racial backgrounds. And as I've learned and grown and experience what it really means to come into my own authentic identity, I now see it as a superpower. I'm able to navigate and maneuver between multiple spaces and multiple worlds and groups, and now better relate with individuals of different backgrounds and experiences. And so, you know, what I'm hearing in terms of a theme across a lot of our superpowers is this notion of those things that we first saw perhaps as barriers or challenges or limitations, that those in fact are our superpowers. So I think, you know, there's a lot of opportunity in that message. So I have a couple more questions here. And again, feel free if there's any questions from our audience, put them in the chat and we'll be happy to take some questions from you all as well. Sarah, this one I'd like to start with you. I'd like to learn more about how you build relationships with peers and leaders who are different than you.
Absolutely. I think we touched on it earlier when we were talking about allyship and mentors and advocacy. And I would say I've actually found some of my strongest allies and mentors in folks that I did not have necessarily something in common with. And I'll speak to some of the executive sponsors that we've got to work with as part of our employee resource groups at RTX. Finding those individuals that truly, you know, are willing to lean into that space that is different, and doing the same yourself. I think it's easy and natural for us to connect with people that we have commonalities with, but the power that comes from connecting with somebody who is different than you, who maybe you don't share those same connections with, and being able to learn from them, you know, what their experiences and strengths are, and vice versa, being able to share your experience and your perspective and your insights. I really have found those to be some of the richest, I would say, ally or mentorship relationships that I've been able to foster in the workplace. So if you don't have those, I would encourage you to seek them out and to really foster those relationships. There's a lot of power comes from being able to build those strong connections and advocacy with people that are different from us.
That's great. Thank you. How about from you, Alonda? Anything you'd like to add in terms of how you build relationships with peers and leaders who are different?
I think, oh, you said Lawanda or Yolanda?
Oh.
I am so sorry.
Okay, go on.
Lawanda.
They also check.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. So this is an interesting topic and question when it comes to building relationships. Over time, I would say it has been something that I've had to put the work in to doing, right? I think, you know, based on my background and my experiences, and there were some deep-seated, I would say, just ways of thinking that I had to overcome, and how I really shifted my mindset and just my career and building relationships. It all comes down to trust, right? Because it had to be both ways. And in order for me to build the allyship, to build the relationships, and to get that interconnectedness at work, I had to open myself up first to trust And then it started developing and happening and just the momentum from there. And so when I talk about trust, it's trusting that I can really talk about who I am, those experiences that I may not, feel so great about, and being able to talk about just myself in general. I'll give you an example. This just happened recently. I don't know if my manager will ever see this, but this is good for him. After a meeting, we were just kind of like kicking it and talking in a conference room. And he asked the question, "What is the strangest food you have eaten?" And he went around the room. And so he started on his left side, and I was the last person. And so I'm like, okay, what am I going to say? Like, people were talking about the foods that they have eaten and foods that they just hate. And so here I am in the meeting or at the table, and I'm like, I don't like chitterlings, right? Now, I said it this way. I said, I don't like chitterlings. And he looked at me and he was like, what? And I said, chitterlings. And he said, Rwanda, are you talking about chitlins? And I was no, so if you guys know, like, this is how we talk about it in our culture, and I'm trying to say chitterlings, and he's like, stop. But right there in that moment, I felt like he understood me. And I was like, okay, he gets it, right? I didn't need to put on for him. He got it. So it's just having that ability to trust, just trust yourself. So I'm still learning every single day. That's how you build relationships. Just open yourself up and trust.
It's a great story. Great story. Yolanda, would love to hear from you. And then a question that came in from our that I'll ask.
Wow, that was great, Lawanda. That was some great transparency. I think that really rolls into how do I deal and build those type of relationship. It is that transparency, and I really try to be transparent and if there is common ground, people, I tend to seek it, but I think the transparency and the emotional intelligence really does help to build those relationships. Where I have even found politically, we usually don't talk about those taboos in the office, right? Religion, politics, whatever. But when you are out on a business trip, you're traveling together, inevitably they come up. And with another coworker, we had some conversation, and then we just looked at both each other and was like, okay, we just agree and disagree, and we moved on. And it was like, wow, we did not have a relationship before then. We were just people who came in and worked on a project. We said hi, we did the cordials, but we didn't really know much about each other. And it was until we got into that point where you have to travel with each other, we were both being transparent and we didn't judge. And I think that's the other key, right? You don't judge somebody else's experiences or thoughts. You communicate, you deal with the ideas and not the person. And in that transparency and in those conversations, you are able to build some relationships. We know we're on different political spectrums, but we both know we have a great love for family, and that drives a lot of our beliefs. So I think that's one way.
That's great. Thank you so much. So one question that came in from our participants that I like to open up to any of our panelists here. What is the best way an ally can show support in today's world?
Learn the vocabulary. For me, it's hard. It can be hard to. I'm a very word person. I like words, and sometimes when you can educate yourself, not with every single aspect of everything, but just when you learn about
Is that on SJ's end or my end? I think it might be SJ.
I think it's SJ's.
Oh, she's back.
Can you hear me now?
Can, yes.
Okay. One thing that I did in Forest, Mississippi, whenever we started the Pride group, the Pride chapter, it was really tricky because there was a lot of, tension around rainbows and things like that. And so my whole goal, as I said, I was a teacher. And so I used my elementary degree to the max. And I was like, this is about teaching. This is about having an open conversation and being willing to allow people to tell their stories, and for us to share ours. And what I found interesting was when we first set up, we had an ERG in the cafeteria. All the ERGs had a table. My friend or my coworker who was helping me lead it, people would come nearby and he was like, and you don't have to be gay or lesbian to be in the group, you can whatever. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, he just said those words out loud. Like, and I was still at that point, and still sometimes today, whispering them. Like I said, I didn't come out to myself till I was 22, and it was growing up, it was very taboo. You don't talk about this, and those are the other people, and so me realizing that about myself, I was like, wow, okay, not only am I trying to educate people, I need to educate myself, and I need to really be okay with this and really be okay with saying the words, for one thing. So one of the activities that I did was a word search, and it wasn't a crossword. It wasn't like you have to know what this means, but it was just literally a list of what LGBTQ stands for and then a few other words. And we had that as an activity, like in the cafeteria. Just grab this, do the word search, get a bracelet, as a prize when you finish. And so just kind of, if it's you, like, wanting to help support, and it sounds backwards, but if you want to help support allies, you can kind of help by educating about yourself. And then in reverse, if how do you become a good ally? That self-education is so big. I have family who have refused to self-educate. They avoid it like the plague, and so we can't really talk much. Like, it's really hard for me to open up to them, and vice versa, because there's that wall there. And I think this could go for any marginalized community. If you are not willing to try to learn it, even if it's uncomfortable, then you're gonna put up a wall between you and that person. Um, just one last thing. I read a quote once that basically said, instead of teaching your children to avoid conversations around politics, religion, and other hard topics, teach them instead to have emotionally healthy conversations. So that's where I am.
Thank you. How about anybody else from our panel? Anyone else would like to chime in on a best way that an ally can show support?
I can chime in, Lexi. For allyship, I would say it's really important to listen, to understand, and to lean into, as SJ was mentioning, lean into those areas that are unknown or maybe uncomfortable. And then once you have that information and you're armed with that as an ally, elevating voices from those populations that may not have a seat at the table or may not be heard as loudly as others. I think that's one of the most important things that an ally can do.
I think the other thing, Sarah mentioned it, and it's really the action piece. So understanding the vocabulary, understanding the community, but also taking action when you see any type of inequity, whether it's microaggression, micro inequities, speaking up. And it does not have to be brazen where it disrupts a meeting, right? It can be afterwards. It can be helping people to understand the impact that some behaviors can have on others. A lot of times it may be unintentional, but it's not the intent, but it's the impact of how it affects the other person. And so I think allyship really can act it in that space. And lastly, to understand anyone can be an ally. It's amazing. You will see children become allies of other children. And so if they're unashamedly, unabashedly up front, being an ally for another kid in class, we can do it too at work with the same energy.
Yes, absolutely. And what I'm hearing a lot of is just that how critical it is in order to be an active ally, there is a component of education, of self-awareness, self-reflection, educating yourself in regards to different groups and populations. And so an additional question came in that really pulls this thread a little bit more. If any of you have any experiences where you've helped to educate up, how have you educated your manager or a mentor on how they could be a better ally or learn more about your particular practice?
I could give a little feedback on this one. When I saw that question come through, I resonated with it because there has been times where I've had to educate up. And it really becomes about the ability to have courageous conversations, right? Having the ability to have that courageous conversation with your manager, as the person asked, and to your manager. So when you are in a situation where you see something firsthand, whether it's to a coworker or to yourself or just overall, the ability to have that conversation. And for me, again, it was a learning experience where I've experienced something that made me feel very uncomfortable. I was able to have that conversation with someone that I trusted, and that person advised me. One of my mentors said, "This is your moment, right? Learn and build the courage to have those conversations, because sometimes they just don't know, right? And that is a moment for you to educate. You don't have to educate them, from grade school to college, but just enlighten them how it made you feel, how it could be perceived. And you never know how that will lead. But I would say, all in all, it's the courageous conversation to start it off.
That's great. Thank you. Any others from our panel? Experiences you've had in educating up?
Can I do a tiny tangent?
Yeah.
It's related. It is related. So the theme that I came up with for our the very beginning of the Pride group at Forest was CARE, care. We have to have the conversations in order to be aware, to respect one another, and to empower each other. And so when you have the conversation, it will lead to awareness. And then when you're aware of what someone's going through or who someone is, you can respect that. And once we can respect each other, we can empower each other. And so that was our goal. Starting off with our group was conversation.
That's great. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. And that was a great tie-in. All right, so we're close to time here. Want to kind of close us out and make sure we have an opportunity to go around for perhaps one additional question for each of our panelists. And this is a tradition for a fairy god boss and asking a lot of their panelists this question. But I'm curious to hear from you all in terms of what you have observed, or what they have observed as the Fairy Godboss organization, is that oftentimes women don't feel comfortable enough bragging or taking ownership of all the amazing things that they're doing and accomplishing in the workplace. So love to hear if each of you wouldn't mind sharing the one accomplishment that you are personal or professional that you are most proud of. I know it's a tough question. It's a good one.
I can take this one, Lexi, first. I would definitely say the work that I have the privilege of doing through the ERGs with my colleagues here, that's really the work that I'm most proud of. I served as a leader in our Indigenous ERG about 7 or 8 years ago before I had a family. And then I took a step back, and we were going through a transformation within our ERGs last year. And I raised my hand to step back in. I just really felt like that was part of my work life that was missing. And so since I've stepped back into that leadership role, I've been so thrilled with what our ERG has been able to accomplish. As you can imagine, the Indigenous ERG is one of our smaller ERGs, and we had a really strong history with this ERG in one part of our business, but we had the opportunity to stand it up within other parts of our business. So that's what I've been working on since our ERG transformation about 1.5 years ago. And it's been an amazing, rewarding experience to be able to establish that ERG in other parts of our business, to grow the ERG, and to reach our employees and members that want to learn more about the Indigenous ERG. So that's work that I'm just so very proud of.
I can go next. I have to piggyback off of what Sarah said. That was going to be my major accomplishment. I joined the ERG within Pratt & Whitney. It was the African American Forum, and then it transitioned to the Black Excellence Network. And I have to say, when it comes to bragging, right, the ERGs held a space, and I brag about this a lot. During the pandemic, the ERGs definitely held a space to support the employees through that time. And the work that we did and the support that we provided, not just to the employees, but to the organization as a whole, was powerful. And sometimes I don't think as ERG leaders, we take credit enough for the support we provide to the corporation then and even now, as we're navigating, the political atmosphere, as we're navigating this world. The ERGs are the safe space for the employees. And I am so proud of the work that we do, the work that we do as leaders, each and every one of us. And the work that we do also plays in parallel to what I do in my everyday job. So I can wake up every single day and say, I am an ERG leader. Oh, and by the way, I am also an operations strategy manager, and I'm doing double duty. So there you have it.
I'll jump in. A few years ago, right after the pandemic, and when a lot of AAPI or Asian American Pacific Islander people were getting just negative attention because of the just stupidity around that time. One thing that I was really proud of is I facilitated a for the month of May, AAPI Heritage Month. I worked with someone in the AAPI group, but I facilitated and managed to get all 9 of the ERGs within Raytheon at the time to come together for a single event. And what it was everybody contributed at least 1 or 2 or 3 slides, and we put together features of AAPI people, including intersectionality. So like the vet group, they found an AAPI veteran they wanted to honor, and they put something together for them. And like across the board, everybody contributed something, and that was just so powerful to me that everybody came together to support that month. And so that's one of the things I'm most proud of.
So I'll round up the bunch, and I will go a little personal. When I look across my career, I do have some accomplishment that I would love to talk about, but I think my proudest accomplishment has been the kids that have come through my house. not just my 3 that I've raised, but there were 8 others that I raised that were not biologically mine. And now I'm giving back again as a foster parent. I think for me, that's my proudest moment. And out of my 3 and the 8, I have 6 who are in technical fields, whether they are engineers, computer science, civil engineer, I have an industrial engineer, and I have a medic who's trying to get in med school. So, and the others are still finding their way, but that's okay. But they are doing well for themselves. And so to me, that is my proudest moment.
That is incredible. Thank you all so much for sharing. And before I close this out, I just want to recognize I saw one more quick question come in terms of should corporations have stated business goals related to racial justice? And I'll just say this really quickly. First and foremost, I think we could have a whole session on that topic. So that might be a future session. But what I will share is that I think it's incredibly important for organizations to be very intentional about how they support the advancement of racial and social justice issues. And so for us at RTX, we do have a 4-pillar strategy around DE&I related to workforce diversity, supplier diversity, public policy, and community relations. Again, our intentional approach is to focus on how we're advancing not only internally, but also externally in the communities by which we live and work in. So with that, I again want to thank SJ, Yolanda, Sarah, LaWanda. Thank you all so much for your time, your vulnerability, your candid stories and experiences. And I hope our participants benefited from it all.
Thank you.